Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is February 16th, 2025, and let's get to the news and map changes happening in Ukraine and Russia, shall we? Today is going to be an exclusive map change update on Deep State, so we'll go over the latest changes, and most of them are really great for the Ukrainians, so let's cover it. First, I want to talk about Kursk because we were having some very good updates and news coming out of Kursk. The Russians are having a meltdown. Specifically, the Telegram channels, they're asking for the head of the Russian commanders and the people that took part in the planning of their latest attack. And the one that I'm talking about is in the eastern side of Kursk, northeastern side, where the Russians launched an offensive towards the village of Nikolsky. The 155th Brigade, Naval Brigade, so this is the brigade, the infamous one, that is known to commit war crimes, to have committed war crimes against Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, was absolutely obliterated by the Ukrainians today by the 47th Brigade. Some footage that was released this morning by the 47th Brigade indicates that they were effectively using FPV drones, minefields. They mined the fields here. So the Russians stormed here in this very open section of the battle area, and the Ukrainians really shared a lot of great footage of the destruction of their armored convoys. And what was also interesting to see is that they used Soviet flags. They didn't use, but they were waving Soviet flags on top of their tanks. So again, just showcases how ill the Russians are on imperialism. That's beside the point. But it's always great news to see Russians having a meltdown. And also, the very fact that we haven't really heard the Russians conduct many offensive operations over the last few weeks showcases how long now it takes for the Russians to be planning for these operations, how long it takes for them to accumulate a grouping of forces to be able to storm and attack the Ukrainians. So it also showcases how strong the Ukrainian defense really is in Kursk, and that the Russians simply are not able to break through in Kursk anymore. And this is going to be an excellent bargaining chip for the Ukrainians for possible negotiations by the end of this year. We will have to wait and see, because based on the announcements and statements by the Trump administration, the European countries, it's been very chaotic. So things are very unclear how things will develop over the next few months with regards to possible negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. And as a matter of fact, in Kursk, the Ukrainians are doing so well that they were also able to mount their own offensive on the western side towards Ulyanok, which I reported on last week. So the Ukrainians are holding really strong in Kursk, and that is fantastic, fantastic news. Now, let's talk about the other important front line right now, which is, of course, Pokrovsk. And there is some good news and there's some bad news here. So let's first cover the south of Pokrovsk. Let's go with the bad news first. You can see that the Russians have renewed their offensives here. And one thing that surprised the Ukrainians, that is around Kurakhove, this was mentioned by one Ukrainian soldier yesterday on Telegram. He mentioned that for the last few weeks, the Russians have not been using armored vehicles, and they were exclusively using civilian vehicles, dirt bikes, etc., or even donkeys for their logistics. But what surprised them is that yesterday's offensive towards the small village of Ulyakli, so that is west of Kurakhove, the Russians actually used for the very first time in weeks about 20 armored vehicles to assault this highway and the villages that sit, I guess, on this, I shouldn't call it a highway, but on this road. So you can see that the Russians are trying to cut off this road and level the line. But they were surprised that for the very first time, the Russians used armored vehicles. The good news is that the Ukrainians were able to strike back and destroy about 17 of these armored vehicles that the Russians used. So that is a combination of MBMPs and MTLBs and BTRs. But unfortunately, a few of them were able to get through and take up positions on the eastern side of the village of Ulyakli. So the Russians continue pushing here in the south and also towards Velika Novosilka. North of Velika Novosilka, you can see how the Russians pushed a little bit more towards Novy Komar. So overall, the Russians, as you can see, the silver lining behind this is that it takes them a very long time now to accumulate a mechanized assault, kind of a grouping of forces with mechanized armored vehicles to be able to conduct offensive operations. No more are the Russians able to do it kind of on a daily basis or every other day. Now they have to wait for a few weeks for them to be able to plan these offensive operations that do include mechanized armored vehicles. So that's good news, but you're seeing that it's still very difficult. There's a lot of pockets right now that likely the Russians will be able to close off around the area of Kurakhove. But the good news is also at the outskirts of Pokrovsk, you can see that the Ukrainians were able to retake certain lost positions at the outskirts of Pokrovsk on the western side, the south side, and also on the eastern side. So you can see that Pishchane is officially under Ukrainian control, the village of Pishchane. You also have Dachinske, so that is south of Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians were able to retake a small sector of Dachinske. And also on the eastern side of Pokrovsk, or I should say Mirnograd, very, very small gains by the Ukrainians, but Vodyane Druhe. So they took up a better position, I guess, around this forested area here. So that helps in breaking the Russian momentum, right? Because for the last few weeks and months, the Russians have been pushing exclusively, and the Ukrainians were not able to answer back. You can see that now the Ukrainians are able to break the Russian momentum to such a level that now the Russians are complaining. There was a Russian Telegram channel that complained this week, saying that the Ukrainians are controlling the sky with FPV drones, and the Russian logistics here are very bad. They're not able to resupply their forces, and that leaves them very, very vulnerable against Ukrainian counteroffensives. And also based on this Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Ukrainians were able to also capture a few Russian soldiers. And these Russian soldiers have been saying that their logistics are very bad. Of course, besides the fact that they're using donkeys, because they're in critical need of supplies, many of these Russian soldiers are suffering from frostbite, have to resort to eating snow and boiling snow because they just can't get water anymore. They're hungry, and obviously weapons can't get through, so they have nothing to defend with. And also, I've talked about it over the last few weeks, but the Russians are using more and more throughout the area of Pokrovsk, specifically disabled, crippled, and injured Russian soldiers to storm the front line. So that really indicates how bad of a situation it is for the Russians right now. There's a full decay of their military and their offensive capabilities. Another good news is, of course, with the appointment over the last few weeks of the General Drapate of the OSU command. So that is the command of Eastern Ukraine, the south of Ukraine. Drapate is known to be a very effective leader in the sense that he doesn't punish Ukrainian commanders for telling the truth. That was a big problem in the Ukrainian military, is that commanders were very afraid of telling the truth and telling the facts of what's currently going on the front line. And so they were giving inaccurate and false statements. And Drapate fosters a culture of, I would prefer you to tell me the truth so I can effectively conduct operations, defensive operations, and offensive operations. So this has really helped. And I can see already that this has helped the Ukrainians in mounting a successful counteroffensive. It's a small one. There's nothing to cheer about. It's not like the Ukrainians are going to push back the Russians all the way up to Solidove or Avdiivka. That's not going to happen. We're seeing that this openness within the Ukrainian military, especially around the area of Pokrovsk, is really is working, in my opinion. And also, over the next few months, the Ukrainians are going to also change to a core military structure, which is going to help centralize and coordinate communication between the different Ukrainian brigades and battalions that are defending this entire sector. That is very important, because that was one of the main problems in 2024, is that many of these battalions, brigades had absolutely no communication between one another. So one brigade didn't know what was going on their western or eastern flank. And so that was really bad, because of course, you're defending this area, but if you don't know what's going on your western flank or your eastern flank, because the other commanders are not communicating that and they're not giving truthful information and factual statements, that's very problematic. So I'm seeing some positive changes within the Ukrainian military leadership as well, with more openness, better coordination, and more centralization of decision making with competent commanders. That's also very important. So that's the video update for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed my quick map update. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about the recent changes. And again, if you guys have any dollars, any extra funds you want to donate, please donate to the different Ukrainian drone funds. There's several links in the description below. That helps the Ukrainians eliminate as many Russian soldiers as possible. So with all that, guys, thank you so much. Slava Ukraini!